Hey,
You live and you learn, eh?
facts. Oh, well, you're Canadian, right, Layla?
Yeah, I am Canadian.
Ah, I see. A, yeah, the A gave it away.
Oh, yeah. It slips out sometimes. But like, do you find that the Canadian accent is any different than? I guess it's kind. You guys sound like you're from the New England kind of side of the U.S. Right.
I'm in like Brooklyn. I'm from Jersey, and SLAVs in Seattle. And
Yeah, so pretty similar in terms of
yeah,
intonation and stuff.
yeah, it's a coastal elite accent, pretty much.
Yeah.
Well, everyone in Canada talks like that, so we're just one big elite. It talks like me. Well, I guess like the rural Canadians, like to me, there's like different like little differences, but nothing drastic. There's also the French Canadians, obviously, who have.
So I'm at Slavoid T.
All right, this is Shit Spouter 37.
This is Black.com build.
This is the Fed Post.
There's a lot to talk about. I guess we could start with this trad stuff. I think that's a good place to start. You wrote this recently, or?
Well, yeah, I just wrote it a few days ago on my my Substack, which I just used to put my thoughts together and stuff. Sometimes I do kind of regret writing it because I actually don't. I was triggered by a Kashuda tweet where she was like, she tweeted an image of a 31-year-old, back in the 80s or something. And let me just pull up the tweet so I can properly describe this.
Who is this, Kashuda?
Kashuda, yeah, she's like this trad like thinker or whatever on Twitter. And I kind of regret doing this piece because trad is kind of something that is relegated to the online spaces and like Twitter and stuff like that. So it actually is kind of relevant. But I thought it was a good foil to kind of bring across the points that I wanted to bring across with respect to fertility and, in a different way than I did for my Bellows piece.
Yeah.
But anyways, let me just, and also just bring to light some data that a lot of people just don't know about in regards to what women say they want, what they say they are struggling with and stuff like that. So it was like a picture of her mom at 31. And so it's just a woman with 2 kids, and it contrasts an image that is captioned with me at 31. And it's just a 31-year-old woman with like a champagne glass and like
I've seen that. Yeah.
Yeah, here, I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
I don't know. It just popped up on my feed. I was just like, and I was just like, this is so, and then she says, if a certain political movement in the 1930s only knew that collecting trophy experiences also meant volunteer. It's like, I believe she's talking about the Nazis. I was so triggered by that. I was like, no, this is so inaccurate in so many ways. I can't take this. And then I was just reading about, I just went online and just tried reading a little bit more about trad and what trad is. Like, people have called me trad. People have accused me of being like, especially when I was tweeting a lot and writing about sex work. I got a lot of people and sex workers actually messaging me and being like, you think it's hot being a trad wife and stuff like that. And I was just like, what the fuck is a trad wife? Like, and I kind of got the idea that it was just like a stay-at-home mom, I guess. But it seems like the trad has kind of more to do with it in a little, like it's about kind of returning to, for sure, like stay-at-home moms, but also
barefoot and pregnant.
Like, no education, like your presence is pretty much relegated to the home. Like, it kind of comes out of this just kind of a general conservative attitude towards women and motherhood and families and stuff like that. And it kind of just it seems to use like the 1950s as its golden kind of model as to what people should do.
Yeah, white picket fence.
Yeah, exactly. Like that whole thing, like but I just think that doesn't really match the historical record for what it's been like for most women across history. And it also doesn't currently match, it's not like women are not having kids because they're traveling the world and, like fulfilling their dreams to, like pursue a stimulating career. Like, women are at work, like they're working people. And they have the same kinds of issues as working men do. And I think that very straightforwardly, the reason why a lot of women are not having children is because they think that their lives are better without children, or that they would not like children. It's more to do, in my mind, to economic pressures and just the general situation in which women and men find themselves in. And that's kind of like this is something that Marxists have been talking about for, a lot of time. Engels and Marx remarked on it. Kollontai is one of my favorite Marxist thinkers, and her whole thing was women and mothers and how to work that into a broader socialist framework, and she talked about it a lot. And even her, back in 1915, she commented on the fact that capitalist states were worrying about declining birth rates. In some places like France, it actually did decline below replacement rate at some points, at least what they thought it was.
Right.
And she remarked that this was causing a lot of anxiety amongst capitalist states, and she was talking through why it is that we observe declining birth rates in capitalist societies and what we can possibly do to start to address that. And she's kind of tying it into the whole broader socialist framework. That's why I wrote that piece. But no offense to anyone, I don't think I have no. If someone wants to stay home, raise kids, I think that's great. And if you have the ability to do so, I think that's great. I know a ton of stay-at-home moms actually, and I think it's fine. It's just fine. It's just I don't think it's. I think that shaming women, for choices that they're allegedly making is, well, number one, that I think those choices are not being made to begin with for most women. Maybe some wealthy women are choosing to not have children and travel the world,
Right.
But I just don't think that's the reality for most women. And I just don't think it's I don't think it's a good way to think about this issue.
No. The whole argument is a false dichotomy. It's only present in bourgeois ideology. The only people that you can either be your ideology for these bourgeois women is on the left, the feminist ideology is, if you don't have kids, you can pursue a career and go travel the world and blah, blah, blah. But the reality is working class women can't actually fucking do that. And then the flip side of that is that these bougie people on the right are you should be a stay-at-home mom, a traditional mom, and the ideal housewife, blah, 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 return to the 50s you're talking about. And that also isn't an option for working class people. So this whole argument is just two manifestations of bourgeois ideology acting like it's the all-encompassing argument, when really it's wearing blinders to the entire material circumstance of the situation.
Well, like I said I wrote in my article, I think it is a conversation that's being had amongst bourgeois women. I think that there's been following in the footsteps of working class women, and there's been a huge surge of women in general of all classes into the workforce. And, I understandably, perhaps they're finding that professional life, especially given the biological realities of what it means to be a woman who has children and, the social realities of that as well. Maybe they're finding that this isn't quite what it's cut out to be. It's quite alienating. It makes everything much more difficult. It's not as fulfilling as perhaps they would have liked. Yeah. And so they're having, I think it's a bit of a debate that's going on in well-to-do women, saying, well, I actually do want to pursue a career over having children, or I want to do both or whatever. And then these women are kind of reacting to that and being like, well, actually the better way is just to stay home and have kids. Pursuing this career whole thing was a false, false, it's not what it's made out to be. It's actually better. Yeah. We shouldn't have left the home to begin with. This is our natural place or whatever. It's not. So it's just a debate amongst them. Working class women have never, there have been, periods where working class women, a segment of them were able to stay home. But generally, broadly, over the history of humankind, women have always been involved in production and have been integral parts of the economic systems in which they existed. They weren't just sitting around at home and doing anything. They were vital parts of every major mode of production. And so this idea that women can just retreat from production and not have any part in it and just, raise, a few kids or something, it's just historically inaccurate. This has not been the history of humankind, not by any not by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah. It's this idea of you have this choice, but you've sort of been guided into one path that doesn't really, it's not like you can just pick between the left or right of this picture. It's always so funny, looking at this thing with the wine glass and the carry-on luggage. It's just I remember there were 3 other pictures in this thing by this, and it's just all
goddamn cartoon style is miserable.
Yeah. It's just always the girl just mad drunk, just it's just some the left is always some woman with a family, living a family life, happy property, and the right is just some woman just like drunk, just like mad drunk on wine in all these situations. Like, yeah, the fucking New Yorker cover where it's like, oh yeah, you're at home just like drinking wine, and this like your apartment's a mess, and you're just like, I don't know if they're trying to say you're miserable or
oh
like,
my god, the COVID cover.
yeah, the COVID cover, yeah.
Holy shit, man.
I don't know if they're like glamorizing it or what they're trying normalizing it. I don't know what they're trying to do. But it's
Well, it's just these two things are essentially liberal outlooks. They're just trying to figure out the source of this problem. They identify a problem, and the liberal kind of default is to fixate on the individuals involved.
Absolutely.
And locate the faults within the individual. As a Marxist, and I don't know how you guys, what your guiding philosophy is, but as for myself, I always look at structural reasons for things, and I root my analysis in the social relations predominant in our current mode of production, and that's how I understand things. So like it's a little annoying because I don't think by and large most people choose their lives. Like they don't choose how their life is going to go.
You're guided, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, only people with money or capital are able to really make significant choices in their lives.
Exactly.
So the rest of people are pretty much like you have very little room for liberty and freedom of decision.
Yeah, it's always like the whole like, oh, just live your life, just do what you want to, chase your dreams, like that type of rhetoric.
Self-help shit.
Yeah. It's always just like, most of us can't fucking do that. So it's like, it's very much in line with that. But yeah, I mean, I guess most of the trad shit, I've always just seen it like when I was left just online, just like, it always just seemed like such a blatant fucking meme and LARP. I was just like, I feel like, there's people who really mean that shit, obviously, but like, I don't think those are the people that have like tens of thousands of followers on Twitter. You know what I mean? So like, whenever I'd see that, I would just be like, you clearly not serious. I mean, you're like in an urban area. You're like, you're like around lib shit. I doubt you're fucking really about this trad life. Like, I don't believe it. Like,
well, I do think though that like feminism is the dominant ideology of
for sure,
the bourgeoisie, like much more than this one.
For sure.
But I think they're equal in the ways in which they do not reflect a proletarian outlook, nor do they speak to actual solutions to the conditions of the proletariat. So yeah. I don't want to pretend that I don't think that conservatism is something that is actually more powerful or something like that.
No.
But I think though that interestingly, like I think that the instantiations of conservatism and left liberalism are both liberal ideologies. I don't think that the conservatives that we kind of encounter today are both deeply liberal. They're just kind of right and left. Yeah. And so I think that is a little interesting how because they need to support. At the end of the day, they're not going to. Neither of these people are going to challenge the dominance of capital, right? So they both need to be liberal. They both need to ground whatever philosophies they have in the right to private property in the idea of an individual as this abstract, like this abstract kind of initial starting point to their analysis. So they're both kind of they're both part of kind of like a left and right of capital, I would say, not really true conservatives as we maybe in the type of, I don't know. I really don't know a lot of conservative thought. I've only read Burke in terms of conservative thinkers, and who else might have? I mean, I've read Hobbes, so I don't really know exactly what a non-liberal conservative would be like, but yeah, they're definitely not those two guys.
Yeah, they're just like two sides of the same coin. Like they're both bourgeois ideologies, and like they both operate within the neoliberal framework. So they're both going to be like these bourgeois ideologies that don't actually address like this actual cause, and they just seek to address symptoms and apply these like misplaced treatments that even in the long run, even if they were the correct treatment, they're not going to actually solve the fucking problem. And then they just run with those.
Yeah, and I think it's actually like both sides are quite cruel to women. I actually think I tweeted about this, but I actually think that trad ideology is a little bit less cruel towards women, and I guess parents in general and stuff like that, because at least like trads or conservatives kind of understand that the current work paradigm is untenable for mothers, and for women who would like to become mothers, which is by all data I've seen, the vast majority of women would have at least an aspiration to have at least one child. So I think that this shaming and this like individualization of what's happening onto the shoulders of women as individuals is actually quite cruel, and I think it really doesn't. Women work so hard, and like they really do struggle to support themselves and their children. And, a huge portion of poverty is made up of women-led families, right? So I think it's quite cruel and it's quite annoying. I know that, that's just bourgeoisie is going to be the bourgeoisie, but there is like a kind of an immoral aspect to it in my mind that I find.
Yeah, it seems even worse a lot of the time coming like from the left as well, when like most of the time like leftist ideology at least touts a framework of like freedom, of liberation, that kind of thing. So at the end of the day, it ends up being almost like more sinister coming from the left. They're like, because it's like they're almost attempting to hide the exploitation that's inherent within it.
Yeah. That's always why the left is always, this applies with like racial politics, a lot of shit. There's always a more sinister thing, because it's like if we all know things are getting worse, like everybody agrees for the most part, if the sentiment of I want to go back, that is at least more, I'm sympathetic more to that than the sentiment of no, this is actually great, this is actually good.
Yeah, I mean, I think given the chance, I think many women actually would opt to stay home, at least when their children are young. And, if the only choices were the current work paradigm and staying home and, having someone to support you and stuff like that, I do imagine a lot of women a lot of women would, but a lot of women wouldn't as well. Like there's a survey from Pew Research which asked working women of all income groups whether or not they would want to work full-time, part-time, or stay home or not work if they could choose.
Right.
And like I think 70% of them said either full-time or part-time work is what they think is the best right now in this moment of their lives, like as mothers, while they're raising children. So yeah, I don't know if it's fair to say that's what women want. Really, but I do.
I think everyone really just wants like a productive role in their society. Like deep down, that's where a lot of this like anxiety and alienation comes from. And so like I think that's evident in what you were saying there about most women saying that they want to work a part-time or full-time job. Like most people, I think, want to work to some extent in order to benefit the betterment of themselves and their community around them. So I think that like in your article, you mentioned a lot of the focus should be like giving people the right livelihood, a job that has not crazy work hours, like a 25, 30-hour work week, whatever it is, because we have the ability to do that with our current productive forces if we just didn't individualize profit. And so giving people an outlet to be able to balance the home and work paradigm is kind of, I feel like, would be the goal. Like, I think that there are aspects of traditionalism as far as like home production that are useful and would be useful in a transitory state as far as just like trying to get a little bit back to some local production and doing some stuff that's more like subsidiarity, to where like people can be sufficient on their own terms a little bit more, not just producing everything at home and not everyone being a gardener or a farmer or whatever, but like childcare being handled by the community and at home, and like entertainment and that type of thing. So being able to shift a little bit to where people have the time and the support resources to do that, and not as that being like the sole function or purpose of their life.
I agree with what in Leila's article about it. Like I think she says it pretty much the way I completely agree, which is like not trying to go backwards, right? I mean it's rarely the solution, especially it's even a question of is it even feasible to.
But we can learn from the past.
Sure, yeah, but the way she just put it was like in the article was like shorter hours, more flexible work schedule, high quality childcare, like that makes more sense to me. Is like we don't need to necessarily directly go backwards. We just need to facilitate because there's just constant economic pressures and they only go up. You know what I mean? They're definitely not going down. Maybe at best they stay static depending where you are. But yeah, they just keep going up and you're still expected to do all the rest of child rearing. You know what I mean? That's the real big problem.
Yeah, I think that these kinds of policies do help. Like if you look at data about European countries which are either unwilling or unable to attract sufficient immigrants to make up for the population decline, have started to look really seriously into this problem. They're just like, okay, how do we get women to have more babies? And they do recognize that there's this gap that exists between an ideal kind of family size, which for women in Europe and the United States and North America is between 2 to 3 children, and their actual attained size, which is anywhere for up to like 1.8 in France to like below 1 in some countries. Like I think in Europe, no one goes below 1 yet. But in Korea and South Korea, for instance, it's like 0.7. So it's really low. But yeah, so they're trying to figure out, okay, how can we do this? And so there are some studies coming out. There is some data coming out showing, for instance, there's like a pretty strong positive relationship between offering good quality, high quality childcare and fertility rates. So the more you invest in that, the higher your fertility rates. Cash payments have been shown to, let me just pull up my notes here because I did take notes on this. Not completely prepared. I wanted to write an article on this actually to really look at what I mean by so let me just go to this article. Okay. So yeah. So for instance, cash benefits, so just giving people or families cash, has shown to have a positive relationship to fertility rate, but it's not as strong as childcare. And finally, flex time has been shown to have a positive relationship, but it's also, the relationship is weak. But I think it goes a little deeper. I think that these things definitely help. And, if our capitalist overlords are listening, definitely consider it. And I think that, whether or not a socialist project would support these specific policies, I think it's more to do with the actual instantiation of it in a country or whatever. But I do think that it goes a bit deeper than that. I think that the fact of the matter is that all of these policies, when they're deployed by capitalist governments, they're not going to ever want to reduce the link between women and men and the labor market. In fact, all of them always want to kind of facilitate the connection between women and the labor market and men and the labor market. So they're more so to help people work, right? To make it possible for them to work, not for them to make it possible to have children and raise them. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the thing is, when you make that link stronger, right? You'll see in Sweden that even though Sweden has a lot of these things, and I think Sweden could go further, but whether this is possible or not under capitalism is an open question, but you'll see that the fertility rate is very much linked to their business cycles. So every time there's a downturn, fertility rates go down. Every time, following 2008 and the restructuring of jobs into more precarious labor, fertility rates went down and they haven't recovered to what they were in the 80s, from the late 80s to 90s, which was above actual replacement level in Sweden. So I think that it's not as simple as simply having more welfare. I think that this is a deeper structural issue and I don't want to say we have to have socialism to really fix it. I don't know, for sure, it remains to be seen how capitalists will deal with this over the coming decades. But I think that there is a contradiction here that cannot be resolved within capitalism.
So you mentioned cash to families. Is that kind of like what you mentioned with the family wage in your article?
No, so for some portion of time in the United States, at least, there was the existence of a single person could make enough money, like a trade unionist could make enough money so that the woman would be able to stay at home. And so some conservatives I've read have suggested going back to that model. So making sure that one person makes enough so that the other person can stay home.
Gotcha.
The main problem I see with that is the fact that this is again, listen, I'm not trying to, when I'm talking about these things, I'm not making any normative. I'm trying not, I don't want to judge anyone for the way in which they live, right? That's not my goal. I'm just trying to explain.
That's the liberals' goal.
Yeah, right. I agree. I'm just trying to explain what currently exists and what we can do given the circumstances. And the fact of the matter is that, marriages are much more unstable than they used to be. A lot of people are having kids outside of marriage. People break up much more often. And so if you're going to be banking on a family wage to make sure that women have someone to support them when they have kids and, for them to feel supported, to have kids and stay home and whatever, that's just not going to work because the traditional whatever family is kind of breaking down and something else is happening, right? Totally. Whether that's good or bad, that's the value judgment. I'm actually quite pro-marriage. I think it's good to get married if you can. It's a good option. But, the fact is a lot of people are just not having kids within marriages anymore. And so we just can't, it's just not, I don't think it's just a good policy direction to take. You need to, as Kollontai said, you have to move the burden of motherhood from the single person or the two people or whatever that currently have to deal with most of it. And you have to make it a society societal duty,
definitely.
Take the
right?
village, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So when she talked about like policies that might help, she talked about their value in terms of that transition from like an individualized mode to something where the whole society takes on that responsibility. And that will also have effects on what women want as well, right? Because I was just, I was thinking about this through this in a Twitter thread today, in all modes of production, women have always, in every mode of production, they have always sought to control their fertility to some extent, right? Like, so in primitive, sorry, I don't want to say primitive, I want to say hunter-gatherer societies, they had some primitive forms of contraception, but they also,
Really?
abortion, they were very bad, like mostly things like, extending the nursing time for infants, because when you're nursing, it acts as a natural contraceptive device, like you don't get pregnant when you're nursing your child. And so women would try to elongate that from for like 2 years or whatever. And so you wouldn't have a kid for those 2 years, for instance.
Wow.
Yeah. Some other cultures had other kind of herbs and plants that they might use, but they were primitive approaches that they were not fail safe, not like what we have today. So what they fell back on actually was abortion. So there was, abortion was basically existed in every single primitive, or sorry, I have to stop saying primitive, hunter-gatherer society.
That's not woke, Layla. You can't say.
I know it's not. It's not. I'm used to saying it because that's what Marx and Engels.
You're talking about the pygmies.
That's what Marx and Engels used to use in their work, and so I was introduced to these. Yeah. Oh my god. I don't actually think they are primitive, but so I do think it's a good move in terms of vocabulary, because I just think it's a different mode of production. I don't think it's primitive per se. But anyways,
right.
And so abortion was widely used. Women have so many abortions, and some of the tactics were really bloody and very dangerous, but they would do it anyways. I was reading about one group, which I mentioned in the beginning of my Bellows article, and I'm just going to pull that up so I get them precisely. I think it's maybe a long thing to get, but I think it's important. So Syria Women, who were Taiwanese indigenous people, they would abort all fetuses they conceived until the ages of 34, 37. And then they would just let their fetuses go to term. And this would limit, all these tactics were to limit fertility to replacement level. Because when you're in a hunter-gatherer society, your ability to be more productive is extremely, there is no ability to be more productive. You're basically stuck with the same kind of implements that you've used for, thousands of years or however long your society has existed.
Yeah, there's limiting factors that you can't get over.
Yeah, exactly.
Man's always at war with those limiting factors, and a primitive stage of accumulation in hunter-gatherer societies that we hadn't quite figured out how to transcend them yet.
Yes, exactly. So, but I'm just to say that women have, so I don't say women because it was always a societal thing. Like what fertility is, how much the birth rate is, was always societally determined. Like what women want is their desires are formed by the society in which they're in. And those desires also inform the society. Like it's a Hegelian, back and forth. Right. And so I think that, when you have a society like capitalism, where you have kids, they're a net economic drain on you. They don't work. They go to school for 26 years or whatever. You cannot count on them to help you in your old age. And they go out to work, and, a lot of children lose touch with their parents nowadays, right? So the only value children have in capitalism, at least to how we observe it, how we experience it, is their spiritual and emotional value, right? And people always talk about the experience of having children and how amazing that is, etc. But in the past, children were always had a clear economic benefit, right? So in the peasant family, even in the early proletarian families, children would be sent out to work in the factory as soon as they could, because a proletarian family could not survive on even 2 wages. Everyone had to work.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, but now, because of commodification, we don't see the social relations and the human labor that is encapsulated in the commodities that we purchase and that we make from strangers, right? So that connection is lost. And so it's very understandable for me in that situation that women would be like, well, I don't know if I want kids. What's the point, right? I definitely understand that kind of attitude, given beyond the material constraints, of the difficulties financially, etc., and time of having children, I definitely understand the attitude that one would wonder, what's the point, right? Because they don't see. Yeah, exactly. Because we're not allowed to, we don't live in a socialized economy where we can, we see how, we don't directly benefit from our labor and we have it stolen from us. And, it's just like a fight to survive. Like it's, day in, day out. So like, I definitely understand that attitude. Like, I don't think I'm not like shocked to hear that more and more women maybe are, but this isn't actually the case, but I wouldn't be shocked to hear in the future that women are just en masse not wanting to have kids or whatever. Like, I definitely understand that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm completely antinatalist, so that sentiment makes sense to me. But
are you really?
CRK's a sicko.
Look, I'm a leftist. Look, I'm still a leftist spiritually. You get what I mean? Like, I'm a nihilist. I'm still like,
whoa. Wait, run that back real quick. You said what now?
All right, chill. Hold
I'm
up.
still a leftist.
Right,
Was that verbatim?
Relax. Look. I just think this. It's very simple, right? There's nothing complicated about it. I wouldn't bring a kid up in this fucking world. I wouldn't do it.
Sure.
I wouldn't. I think it's wrong. And look, but if somebody else wants, but my whole thing is, socially, culturally, I'm libertarian. I don't give a fuck. You want to have kids? Have kids. I don't care. I really don't care. Like, I do it if you want to. If you feel like it'll make you happy, or if you feel like, and that's the other thing. The financial incentive is another thing that you just touched on, and that's something I think about too. Is like, poorer families have higher fertility rates around the world, right? Typically, and usually it's out of a survival thing. It's out of like, 30% of these kids are gonna fucking die probably because shit is fucked up, and so I mean that's just what it is. And
it
then
also helps with accumulation for the family as well. Right.
And rich families are known to have less kids, maybe one or two or whatever. And like as societies get wealthier, so that's where I get, I'm very like not informed on this topic. So for me, it's hard to discern a pattern out of this, because I get that like having a kid is expensive. So people have less kids now in our generation in America than previous generations because it's expensive. And yet I still know that, there's higher rates of fertility in poorer communities and people. So like that, I have trouble reconciling that. I have trouble reconciling with the whole, there's fears of overpopulation. What you mentioned in your article of like, there's economic value to producing more kids, and these societies that aren't producing enough kids, like they want to pump the numbers up for economic productivity. But then at the same time, people worry about overpopulation, and China's got the one child rule. So like,
I think they don't have that anymore. Actually, they did away with that a couple of decades
ago. They
ago.
overcorrected, right? That's why they have to like draw back on that. It's like now they have an issue where they've got too many boys and not enough girls, and they're like,
I think the contradiction between like lesser developed nations, people in poverty having higher fertility rates versus places like the first world nations, United States, etc., that are more developed, further along in capitalism. The difference between their fertility rates or like birth rates, I think, is less based in like the fact like there is a difference because they are both operating in slightly differing modes of production. The slightly less developed countries or the less developed countries aren't quite fully developed capitalist nations, right? Their mode of production is not fully developed to the extent which ours is, and so their culture reflects that a little bit. So their family ties are stronger in most of those than they are here, and a lot of that comes from the way that like capitalism inherently has eroded our family structure.
Well, I think that can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I think that basically like I do think obviously people on Twitter are always telling me like, well, there's more to this than like just like people having money, like there's like a cultural aspect, like, and I think that's true. Like I think that there is a cultural aspect that exists in some countries that will promote birth rates, but like where I guess as a Marxist, my next question is, okay, where do you think ideas come from, right?
Oh, totally. It originates in the mode of production.
And so I think that poorer countries who may be less developed, who have maybe more women involved in a rural economy, or like a proletarian, like an early proletarian existence, it makes sense to me that birth rates would be higher. But as you kind of go down and completely kind of get into the later stage of being a proletarian, and that comes also with access to reproductive technologies that are highly effective and all that stuff. Like, so yeah, like, you know, you see throughout the world, whether they're conservative or not, even interestingly, whether women are involved in production, like involved in wage labor or not, birth rates are declining across the world, even in places that have like extremely low literacy rates for women, like 30, like literacy, like just being able to read, birth rates are declining. You know, I was looking at a few Arab countries, for instance, like Saudi Arabia. I think we'd all agree that's a quite conservative culture, very religious, but birth rates are close to 2 now, like they're 2.4 or something like that, and they're on the decline. I'm sure that they'll reach below replacement level within the next coming decade, right? So you know, I don't think that culture can really answer to this stuff. Like, I think that there is something to do with the way in which capitalism affects the way that we live, affects the way that we think, affects the kind of desires that we have.
Totally.
Yeah.
It creates those cultural differences. Like the system itself and like the economic and the relation to production as well as the mode of production creates the differences that manifest in the cultural sphere for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And in terms of like, you know, going back, like, you know, the problem is that, Colin Ty speaks about this. Like, she talks about how, well, you can either take women out of production and put them back in the home and remove their political rights and whatever political rights they've gained so far, which weren't substantial in Russia in 1915, but, you know, or we could figure out a new paradigm. Like, you know, she was a revolutionary, so she wanted to, she was on the verge of revolution, so she was being super optimistic. Or we could revolutionize the way in which work and reproduction is dealt with in society. And she was just like, listen, like, it's not, you know, even if you were to put women back home, quote unquote, the problem is that marriages, even back then in 1915, were already becoming more and more unstable. Like, you know, there's just, you know, but secondly, the thing is that capitalism has now integrated, I think 50% of the workforce, are women. So if you removed all those people, if you removed all that productivity, we would have to go back not just to an older family form, but also to like older, like less stuff that we use.
Totally.
We'd have to like go back to like a proletarian existence, like, you know, like 60 years ago or whatever it might be, right? Like,
well,
and, you know, our advances in medicine are like all these different things, right? Like part of the reason why we have these advantages is because we were able to, capitalism was more productive, and, you know, the surplus we were able to take some of that surplus and socialize it and make a healthcare system, like, you know, like these are all part of it, right? Like, you can't detach one thing from the other and just have one thing and not have the other. Like, it's good and bad, right?
Okay, look, I'm asking because I really don't know. Is the replacement level being lower that much of a concern if you know, efficiency and optimization are increasing, right? So if you don't necessarily need the same amount of people to produce the same amount of you know, production or value or whatever. So
sure.
Isn't that part of why the richer societies and families have less kids? Because, you know, it's sort of in line with all that. Isn't that part of that? Or do you feel like it's a concern in that there's going to be some instability out of that and some lack of production, and it's a capitalist concern? Is that what you guys mean?
So I believe that capitalists are worried about birth rates because capitalism needs it constantly needs to generate more profit, which is tied to a generation of value. And so value can be generated in two ways. Either you can expand value by expanding the absolute rate of value, which just means more workers, longer hours, stuff like that. Or you can increase the intensity of work through technology, through productivity saving technologies.
Right.
So right now, what we're seeing is that productivity levels are going down. But there's also another aspect to it wherein you need like consumers as well to kind of consume all of this capital. It's a bit like I'm still wrapping my head around this, but basically capital needs to constantly increase the amount of value, like global capital, right? And so that's why we see like in less developed nations that don't still have a relatively high birth rate or a high birth rate, they weren't as badly hit by the 2008 crisis because they were able to just simply bring more people into the working class from, you know, rural areas, whatever, bring them to the factories and produce more from that point. Whereas we're still kind of spluttering we're still kind of in that crisis in a lot of ways because we were not able to increase the rate of absolute value generation like capitalists in those countries were. But also productivity capitalists are not investing in productivity as much anymore because the rate of profit is falling. So I don't want to get into like this like hardcore Marx stuff because then I'm going to just sound stupid. But essentially capitalism is very fucked up. Like it's fucked. Like it has all these contradictions in it that sure, it can raise productivity by increasing the amount of value generated or like stuff generated per worker. But the problem is that capitalism gets its value, like it gets its profit from human labor. So if you're putting in less human labor into something, then that will generate less profit. And so that's why we see this is the whole theory of the rate of profit exactly that Marx talked about.
Right.
So even though they're driven to do that because of they're especially driven to do that when we took kids out of labor, when we reduced the labor pool by doing that, that's when they really started going on this rationalization and raising productivity through machines, right? So they're not able to do that currently under this current paradigm because they are in our countries because the rate of profit is falling, and so they're not going to do it unless they see profit, right? That's capitalists don't they don't do things just to be productive; they do things to get profit. But but conversely, I don't know how capitalists will solve this contradiction in advanced capitalist nations. I think that one of the ways they are trying to solve it is by bringing in more immigration, which allows them to increase their absolute value they're generating by just bringing in more proletarians. So I do think that it seems to me that capitalists will try to resolve this contradiction by perhaps raising birth rates again, maybe, but maybe not. I'm not sure. But either way, there's always going to be they can't really resolve ultimately their accumulation crisis. Like they cannot ever resolve the problem of value generation because they're damned if they do, damned if they don't, basically. So that's why I don't know if it's hard for me to. People say no, we're just going to become atomized and no one's going to have kids. I don't know if that's a really realistic prediction because I don't know how value would be generated in that situation.
Well, I think I mean, I just feel like there's what I was trying to say was like there's a balancing act between being black-pilled and being pragmatic, right? You have to be pessimistic enough to understand the reality of the situation, right? You don't want to be too naive about it, but you have to be pragmatic, but you don't want to be so pragmatic that you just give up hope for anything better. Obviously, that's the tricky thing to thread. But I just feel like when I look around at this country specifically, I'm just sticking to this country. It just seems like labor is dead, unions are dead, full automation is inevitable. We're in a very financialized country where everything is made up value. You know what I mean? The things that provide value here are out of thin air. You know what I mean? All the real value, like material value or like anything close to anything industrial or tangible is outsourced. You know what I mean? It's in Southeast Asia. So it's like, in my mind, it's like that's the thing I have trouble reconciling with a lot of Marxist things is like it seems like it's hard to apply here because that the avenues to apply them here are shrinking, and not only just shrinking. I mean, shrinking is that's one problem, right? But like it's shrinking so much that it almost looks unfeasible here. You get what I mean? And that's why like I have like I guess in my mind I have an acceptance that they've won this, and that's in my mentality. It's like, all right, if we take the assumption that they've won this, right, in terms of labor and the traditional relationships with that, and everything's highly financialized here, then an abstract value of everything, then we need a new mode of taking care of the underclass. That's how I view it. And it's like then it gets into, all right, well, we need to secure services for people to make sure that they can not be in a precarious, desperate situation, and secure those resources from the elite. That's the general way I view it, is like, as far as work having value and providing some like spiritual meaning, like I totally get that. I just feel like, it's like the trad thing in general. It's just like, it's not only that I don't want to go back, I don't think we can, even if we wanted to, you know what I mean? And it's like, that's where it just feels like, I don't know. I mean, see what you always talk about, like recontextualizing, but I mean, I was asking on the timeline too, like, the seizing the means of production thing, right? I don't know what that means in 2020 in America. I don't know what that means. And maybe I'm stupid for that. Maybe I'm retarded for that. I don't know, but I don't know what is the means of production here in this country in 2020. And
it would look like probably like nationalizing our energy corporations, like oil imports, et cetera, et cetera. It would look like, if we're doing it on just a national basis and not international basis, right, it would look like reverting at least in some extent, towards community and local based production. So that would mean the means of agricultural production being shifted closer to home, being placed in the hands of the workers in the form of workers' co-ops, community-owned co-ops, etc. The traditional like Marxist-Leninist sense, the act of seizing the means of production would be through organizing the working class into the proletariat, which would then be the vanguard party to lead a revolution to take over, the state, and then through state ownership of nationalization of industry, that would be representative of the people owning the industries themselves and the people seizing the means of production.
So we'd have to revert back to a manufacturing economy. Would that be a crucial first step?
I don't think it's necessarily a revert back. Like, I think thinking of it as a step backwards is wrong. I don't think that it's primitive to revert to a local production economy. I think that in light of environmental concerns, resource consumption, and just general consumption levels, it's actually the more forward-thinking thing to do.
No, I don't mean it I don't mean any value judgment. I don't mean it's a bad thing. I mean, we'd literally have to turn the clock back. Basically, we'd have to go back to half a century ago. Basically.
Well, that's where questions of international revolution and national revolutions come into place. If the Trotskyite position is an international revolution for communism, which would involve all of the different working class sectors all over the country, or all over the world, which right now seems just in this current stage, that's just not something that would happen. It would have to be time from now and class consciousness building, blah, 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 blah. But as far as if we were trying to do it here in America now, today, or soon, or whatever, it would require incentivizing local productions, local substitution for imports, etc.
Right. And that's what I find funny is seizing the means production right now, and maybe if you expand it to a international context, you'd have to go to China. You know what I mean? Which it's just funny to me because I mean you guys, I won't say I don't know how you guys feel about it, but COH, I know you definitely, but you definitely don't, but there's a lot of China basically adoration if you're a modern American Marxist, and it's that's what I don't get is you'd have to go there if you want to seize the means of production. That's where manufacturing is. That's where our manufacturing. That's where we outsource. So it just becomes a funny thing to me where it's how does this manifest? I mean, say you're trying to revert it back. Okay, that makes sense. But in the way things are right now, the way they're laid out right now, you'd have to go to China for that. And it just seems funny to have a.
You wouldn't have to go to China to place high tariffs on imports and then subsidize local production. That could just be done under our traditional economic framework. Even now, that wouldn't even honestly even take that much of a revolutionary thing or program.
Which Trump was kind of trying to do, right?
Yeah, sure.
He's a Marxist, right?
I don't know that my line of thinking is at all representative of the Marxist line of thinking on this subject at all. That's why I'm hesitant to just lean into I'm a communist or I'm a Marxist. I don't really know what the general Marxist community thinks on this. This is just my thoughts and questions I have after reading the work.
No, I get that. I'm just saying that's. I keep hearing that phrase so much, and I just start to wonder I don't really know what it means right now. You know what I mean? I'm it's not like an attack. I'm trying to imagine what it means. You know what I mean? And I can't really put it together, you know what I mean, in any other way than that. But I see what you mean. Yeah, I mean, maybe we can do tariffs, bring it back here, and then work off that base. That would make more sense. Yeah.
I think class redux. I think that your intuitions are kind of correct in that. So the problem is that actually the reason why manufacturing jobs left quote unquote the United States isn't because they were outsourced. That's not the primary reason. That did happen a little bit, but it was mainly because they were automated away. And so the need for labor in that sector just diminished a lot.
Right.
So those jobs are not coming back. They're gone. They're automated, which is a good thing, right? Which is good. We don't want people to do work that is harmful to them, that is boring. We want to reduce the amount of unnecessary labor being done in our society. I'm 100% on board.
Right.
But when we talk about, seizing the means of production, I don't know. I think that is a difficult thing to really opine about. And I don't know if there's anything to bring back per se, but what we can work for is a demand for full employment. Like there's so much work to do, right? Like there's so much work. Yeah. Infrastructure.
Right.
There's like care labor, so much care labor that will need to be done, especially with our aging population, women,
agricultural shit,
agricultural stuff. Like there's so much work to do that's just not being done. People are being left alone and isolated, and our cities are crumbling. And, not only are they crumbling, they're just aesthetically so ugly. So there's so much work that can be done. Those jobs, they're not being done because they don't generate profit for capital. But they could be done. Like there's no reason, like, so I think that's maybe a better framework to think about it. Like back in the day, when Lenin was working on his project, when Leninism was being created, they didn't have the Green Revolution. They didn't have, a lot of things were not automated. Like it was a completely different situation, right? And he developed his philosophy based on the material conditions that he was faced with. Mm-hmm. And I love Lenin. I read him every single day. Yep. Yeah, but he had a specific set of material conditions that he had to deal with, and we have our own. We have to think about. That's why I think Marx's frame is so useful, because it really forces us to think about production and what production is and what it should be. And that's why I think it's so important to have that positive. Like, I'm not saying like we have to have but we have to say like, okay, what kind of society we actually want to live in? Like, what are we working towards? Like, what kind of jobs do we want to have? What kind of jobs do we not want to have? Like these things are just happening. Like jobs are being lost and automated away. We have no say, right? It just happens, and we deal with the consequences, right? So Marxism is about taking these decisions into the hands of the people and having a conversation, decided, okay, like, maybe I like creating cars on the factory floor. I don't know, like maybe I do, right? And I maybe don't want to automate that. It's a good way of spending the day, and there's better quality cars in some ways, whatever. Like we can have those kinds of conversations, but the fact is that we're not. Like technology isn't something that just, capitalists like to pretend as if technology exists outside of human relations and just
the
happens.
Invisible hand.
Exactly. Yeah. And there's just nothing we can do about it. It's just technology's happening. It's automating things. Like we can't do anything about this, guys. Like it's just crazy. Like it's just, future. But like it's not true. Like technologies are made by humans for human beings, and we decide how we want to use them and how we don't want to use them. So I think that's a better frame of thinking about it. Like really thinking about what kind of society we want to make and what do we need to I don't think actually that a lot of manufacturing necessarily needs to exist. Like I think we could probably do without a lot of the various jobs that we have. But I think there's a lot of jobs that we do need that are not being done. Like, like when you hear about in Canada, for instance, like we had an inquisition by the army into long-term care homes, and the report that they delivered was just shocking. It was like people were being force-fed, people were being left in their
horrible shit.
Yeah, it was just like what's going on? Like this is like this is one of the wealthiest countries in the history of humankind, and we cannot take care of the elderly. Like it's just
children,
or women, like whatever group, like mothers, for instance, like, or a lot of like everyone needs care, everyone needs assistance, everyone needs human connection and stuff like that. So like I just think we just don't have a society that's geared towards fulfilling human need. We're a society that's geared towards creating value.
Totally.
And that value creation it exists within a contradictory process that can never be resolved. Like, so even as capitalists automate things, their rate of profit will continue to fall. They're going to stop investing into productivity technologies, and then try to expand the absolute rate of value generation, which means they're going to try to extend the working day. They're going to try to bring in more people into the workforce. So perhaps we'll see a resurgence of child labor. So they cannot resolve it. Capitalism cannot resolve this issue. Like, but the only people who can is the proletariat. So that's where we're at now. Like, we really, like, I know I probably sound like a dumb utopian, but I really think that communism is the only answer to these issues.
I like your point there about, how some production is quote unquote now made unnecessary due to automation or whatever, but how there's some production that we may still want to do, or we may still could do, that would have positive benefit for the community, for community structure, for social bonds, etc. And I think a really great example of that is looking at the agricultural industry, right? Capitalism incentivizes profit, incentivizes accumulation of profit and capital over well-being of just the workers, the community, people, humanity, the planet, etc. With the re-envisioned economy that focuses instead of on individual profit, focuses on socialization of profit, right? Reinvestment of profit into workers and communities' lives and well-being. We could have a different set of goals and values as far as what we produce and how we produce it. So when you look at the agricultural industry, capitalism incentivizes mass production on an industrial level, right? It incentivizes all these crazy GMOs and all this unnatural shit and all these crazy Roundup, and then GMOs that can withstand Roundup, and then weeds get stronger. So they make stronger Roundup, then they make stronger GMOs, then weeds get stronger, and it's just a fucking cycle. And humans are constantly at war with their limiting factors. Like that's what we've always done our entire existence. And capitalism is a huge stage of that. It's, pushing the developmental forces, and developmenting the productive forces as much as we can. And I think that looking at agriculture, one way we can still develop our productive forces while looking back to the past as a way to kind of inform us is that we can move away from this mass production kind of system, and we can move to more locally based agricultural systems that are better for the economy, produce more nutritious food, and also are better for people by giving them connection to the earth, connection to food production and community well-being, by making an emphasis on some sort of level of home production, if you can, being able to be a little bit more self-sufficient and within community levels, to be able to reduce the need to earn, to reduce the need to work, so lessening the work week, lessening the amount of hours, with an economy that's restructured in a way that reinvests profit and socializes it rather than individualizes it. You can do that, and you can have, you can bring back modes of production that may have been automated away, but may not have should have been automated away.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that for sure, there's definitely some more ecologically friendly ways of doing some things. And I think the Marxist kind of project is not necessarily to make work where you don't need to make work. So I think most things we've automated away, I think are fine remaining automated in a lot of instances. Although I think though, if we're going to be moving to some kind of automated paradigm when it comes to healthcare, I don't think that's better than human to human interaction. But teaching, for instance, I don't think that it's better to have a computer teach a child. But I think the point is we want to create a society where we can meet our needs, whatever those needs are socially determined to be, right? So, we decide whether we want to put labor into creating non-necessary things like ice cream or whatever. Do we want to have an ice cream factory? Or do we want more leisure time instead? And those are the kind of conversations that we are going to have. What that actually looks like, I don't think can really determine the abstract, because it is going to be determined through a democratic process. So,
yeah. Productive labor. Yeah. That's another thing I've been, wondering about basically. In my mind, we talked about it before, with some other guests, but I don't like the conversation only because it gets very subjective to me, but maybe you guys can, demystify it or whatever. But I just, okay, so the sex work thing, right? So your article about sex work, right? About how it's not real work and it's not productive labor.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the thing in my mind is that there's a lot of labor that's not necessarily, how should I put this? Well, maybe you could argue it is productive in the Marxist sense. But the other point you made was that it's not necessary, right? And I feel like there's a lot of labor is unnecessary, right? Because if you could revert back to, I don't know, an agrarian lifestyle or a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, then a lot of the industrial labor is unnecessary, because it's not really needed. You don't really.
Well, even an economy that doesn't just fully run on profit would be less consumption based in general, just naturally. It wouldn't be we're agrarian society now, so now you can't go Uber Eats. It would be there's no incentive to have industries that don't serve a necessary or productive function.
So when I spoke about production in that piece, and when I speak about productivity right now, is productive vis-a-vis capital. So for capitalists, whether so for instance, a housewife, she does a lot of hard work, she does socially necessary labor, she's helping the family run, etc. But her work is not productive to capitalists, because capitalists only view something as productive if you're creating value for them.
Right.
So if you're not creating a commodity or enabling that commodity to be delivered and have its value actualized through sales, you're not a productive worker. So that's what we have to understand by productivity. Socially necessary is a little bit less clear cut, even though productivity, like productive labor is also, you also have to think through things and stuff as well. But I think it's a little bit more clear. Socially necessary labor is historically determined and specific, right? So socially necessary for us today may not have been socially necessary 15 or 50 years ago. Like, for instance, like no one would accept that the same child mortality rates that were considered like just part of the part of life, 60 years ago or whatever. Right. Like no one's gonna accept that anymore, because we don't need to. We have the technologies and we have the knowledge to prevent unnecessary infant mortality. So why shouldn't we? So I think that some things like we can kind of pretty much know for sure, we want to have healthcare, we want to have, probably some kind of education system. We want to have recreational opportunities, who knows, whatever we might think, for sure is socially necessary. I think healthcare is a big one, obviously. And, housing is necessary, clothing, those kinds of things. Those kind of basic things are necessary. But above and beyond that is something that we need to discuss as a society. And so I think from this view of capital, sex work is definitely not productive because it doesn't create a commodity that can be sold with its value. It can't be alienated from the person who's producing the work. So the sex worker sells her body parts for people to have sex with. And so she can't put it away from her body and have the capitalist take it and then use technologies to amplify the amount of things that are, amount of commodities that are being created. The amount of sex she can have with a man or whatever is limited. So it's not a commodity in the capitalist sense. It's not productive in that sense, but more so, I think the socially necessary is more so where I might get into a bit of trouble, because some people have told me online and stuff and in person, well, what if the communist society of the future just decides that we think that sex work is actually necessary and people should be put to work having sex with others? But then my retort to that is well, they would just have sex. They would just have sex with other people, period.
Right.
Yeah, you would just have sex. You wouldn't pay someone to have sex with you. The only reason this happens is because of women do this because they're in general, they're made to do it because they are financially constrained. And also there's an aspect of, I don't really talk about feminism a lot and stuff because I'm not a feminist in the sense that I follow a class analysis and not one based on gender. But there are definitely gender differences in our society, which makes it more acceptable for, number one, women to sell their bodies, and number two, men, to find it acceptable to buy someone's body, right? There is this relationship of domination between the sexes that hasn't completely gone away. And so those are the reasons, the reasons for that give rise to prostitution will disappear with the disappearance of class society. And so I can't really understand why you would think that having sex with someone out of because you want to dominate them. I don't really see that as a necessary thing. I don't see that as us as a society deciding, yes, this is actually something that we should take people out of their leisure time to do. I don't think that would happen, and it doesn't make any sense from any point of view. From even currently, it's definitely not a socially necessary service, but even in a social society, I can't really see it being socially necessary either. But I actually think it's impossible. I think I'm gonna go with definitely not for that. But I don't know. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, I for one, just to be clear, just to wipe this away from anything I'm saying, is I find glorifying or fetishizing any work to be completely bizarre. That shit fucking weird as fuck. And to be real, a lot of Marxist leftist DSA motherfuckers do this with industrial labor, with 20th century
post-work boot.
We talked about this before with gay stepdad, but there's a lot of this romanticizing labor in this way. And it's yo, that shit sucked. They're getting fucking maimed, their kids are fucking working next to them, motherfuckers are dying. There's nothing romantic about it. It's the fucking job, you know what I mean? So it's but yeah, so to dead all that. Like anybody who's glorifying sex work or whatever is fucking weird as fuck, just bizarre. Like I don't understand that at all.
That's part of the neoliberal project, though. It's like finding these like random sects of people and things to like glorify and act like they're like quote unquote normalize them, right? So that we can bring sex workers into normal political economy, so they can be exploited under traditional capitalist relations like everyone else is.
Right. That's woke capital in general. Is that actually this thing that makes us profit is actually woke, or it's actually like a good thing or empowering, or whatever. That's that whole that's the whole thing at the beginning of like the woman, like, you know, I'm going to travel and do all this stuff instead of have a kid. It's like, you know, glorifying it.
Yeah, the leftist argument for sex work is so stupid on so many levels. Like, even if my argument is weak, the Marxist argument is weak against sex work is weak, their argument is even dumber and stupider. So they don't have a like they'll say things
you're way
like,
more dumber and stupider than I am.
Yeah, like,
for real, that ass.
It's so like sex work isn't like any other work. Just even if you accept that it's actually socially necessary labor and it is productive, even if you were to accept that, which I don't, but even if I was to accept that, it's not like any other work. Like there's huge, like the rates of violence for sex workers is more than any other type of civilian labor. You have to go to the army to get as harassed and killed and abused as you would as a sex worker. It's not like any other work. You cannot make sex work meet any safety standard, like workplace safety standard of any developed nation. It's impossible because of the nature of the work. Like, so this is where I think a lot about radical feminists arguments against sex work. I think a lot of the arguments they make are very reasonable. Like they're just like, listen, like you like, you know, for COVID-19, for instance, like, do you think we can prevent the spread if you're doing sex work? You can't, right? It's impossible because of the nature of the work. It isn't like anything else, just on that basis. But I don't care about the liberals' notion of what work is. I don't agree with the society they've built. So I don't want to think about like whether it's work like within our current context. I want to think about whether it's work for like as we're trying to move away from this paradigm into something else. Like how does that work in this paradigm? And like
whether it should be work or whether it should be a thing that's around. Like, should it be something that we exert labor power to?
Yeah, look, I mean, right. Off the bat, we can dad the whole liberal like fetishization of any type of work. Like we can off the bat we can dad that. But yeah, I do think it is work because I mean, this is the thing. Is like I don't think work is a good thing though. That's the thing. Like when they say it is work, they mean it in work is a noble thing or whatever. I think of work as not a noble thing. I don't think of it that way. So when I say it is work, I think it's a plight. That's how I view it. So
under capitalism, work is just like a condition. Like it's something that we have to deal with in order to live. Like you have to buy in and sell your labor power as a worker to a boss in order to have enough
and exactly
capital to live.
Yeah, and that whole the violence thing you bring up, right? Like that 100% true, obviously. And it's just like, but you know, if you're working in a factory plant or whatever, like the risk of getting maimed and all this, the physical harm that happens to you is also fucking terrible. And you know, I find a lot of Marxists that like romanticize this type of work as well. And I'm just like, I don't understand it. It's like, you know, all work inherently, not all, but like, you know, work isn't. There's a lot of. I don't think the violence dimension is an aspect to it because I just feel like there's a lot of work that's just sometimes that comes with what work is, and that doesn't mean it's a good thing or
I don't understand why socialists, like so-called socialists, wouldn't want to remove like I accept that all work is a lot of work maims people, not only physically but emotionally. Right, like they spend their lives doing repetitive tasks and you know dying inside spiritually, intellectually. They never, you know, it's awful. So we want to minimize these kinds of things, not like create new venues for sex capitalists or sex rent seekers to extract value. We don't want to do that. We want to create good jobs for all, better jobs as much as possible, remove as much socially unnecessary labor as we can so that people can be free from doing that stuff or automate it away if it's not socially necessary. That is what we should be trying to work towards. And that's what we should be fighting for, not fighting for states to like, you know, Liza Featherstone wrote an article for Jacobin saying like, well, you know, it's good that we have sex work because it gives women in wage labor other venues to make money.
Oh yeah, those people are sicko. They're sicko.
It's just
In your article, you say at the very end about sex work, or the first part, how at worst sex work provides a convenient release valve for governments to funnel unemployment and poverty through.
yes.
And that's a perfect fucking example of it. And then looking at how OnlyFans has blossomed and exploded during the age of the pandemic, but specifically during the early part of the pandemic when everyone lost their goddamn jobs. It's another way to look at it, like contextualize the material.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sick. Oh yeah, look, I want to be clear. Like anybody who's like, OnlyFans is a Ponzi scheme, and like the people who are, the Jacobin motherfuckers that like glorify it or like try to make it empowering, whatever. They're sickos. And I mean, look, I obviously I come from,
These people are sick.
People are sick, yeah. And I mean, like, I come from like left social leanings, whatever. So my girl was like used to be rad femme, and I used to be rad lib the other way, and like we used to argue about this, and I used to be like, I don't give a fuck about I'm not for banning sex work because I care about the economic coercion aspect of it, right? So and I mean, to some degree I still feel this way. I don't think people should be economically coerced into any type of sex work. That's how I feel about it. You know what I mean? And that's why the conditions are dangerous. That's why, it being illegal is part of that too, but like more than the legality thing, because I know you talked about that in your article too, is like more than that is like you're being economically coerced into it. And that's this whole liberal thing. Like you get liberal civil freedoms, social freedoms, but you don't have economic freedom. And if you're forced into this, you're screwed. And that's not ideal in any sense. So I mean, but this is the thing. If we were to have, and I don't want to risk the sound of being utopian or whatever, but if there was a society where you're not being economically coerced into this, right? You have all your base needs met through services or guaranteed jobs or whatever, and you still choose to do sex work, I don't really care. That's how I feel about it. I don't really give a shit. I mean, if you want to do it, whatever, as long as you're not being forced into doing it. And I think that it being illegal, I think of sex work and drugs and guns in the same vein of vice in terms of like, I think that the economic conditions are what makes these vices more deadly and more destructive and deteriorating of society. Ideally, you have a society where everybody's good and these things are legal and that you have the choice to do these things, but nobody chooses to. In my mind, that's the ideal situation. Is like you could buy as many guns as you want and take as many drugs you want and do all this fucked up shit, but you don't choose to. You don't need to because you have other avenues for organic intimacy. You don't need sex work. You have other avenues for fulfillment. You don't need drugs. You don't. You have safety, and you can resolve differences in other ways than needing guns. Like that's how I view it. Like you won't need it.
I actually disagree. I think it should. Everyone is in so in a future social society will have to be involved in productive labor. Okay, like no one could just have their job as like a parasite. Colin Tai talks about this in relation to sex workers specifically, but for instance, Luxembourg talks about, and she as well, Colin Tai as well talks about even housewives in this because like especially back in the day and probably even now, most housewives are like well-to-do people who are married to well-to-do people, and so they don't contribute to productive labor, and so they're just kind of coasting off the products of everyone else, of the working class, right? That's working and creating what they need, and they're just kind of coasting off of it without producing anything in return. So no, I don't agree that sex work should be. It doesn't make sense to me anyways, because like if everyone has what they need, I mean, why don't you just have sex with people? Like just have sex with someone who wants to have sex with you. Like
I get that, but you know that there's like high end escorts, right? So there's escorts who
So in that sense, I think that those people should be forced to work. And Colin Tai
to go to gulag.
Colin Tai, she was like if they don't agree to work productive labor, they'll be sent to a labor camp.
Wait, are you serious?
Yes, that's what she said. Yeah, she was
no. What do you think? I mean,
well, I don't think that. I mean, I don't know. I do think that obligating people to work is one of the few
labor vouchers versus wages.
Yeah, in a transitional kind of society from like capitalism to communism, while we're still figuring out new forms of democratic consensus making and stuff like that. I think it is important that everyone contribute and everyone, because like that is part of the socialist ethic. The socialist ethic is that we're all working together, we're all producing things, and we decide together how we're going to use the products of our labor. And so, and that's why I talked about in the chat about how Marxism actually isn't just, it does have some normative kind of aspects to it, right? And this is one of them. Like Marx saw work not only as a way of producing things that we need, but it's also producing ourselves, right? So we produce ourselves through the kind of work and the social relations that come in through that work, by through work. So everyone needs to work in order to produce an egalitarian democratic society, right? Or else you're going to have everyone who can work, rather, or else you're going to have, you're not going to produce the kind of society that you want to have. And, as I was saying, Marx bases his philosophy on Rousseau about how we are at our core human beings that are born free, but everywhere born in chains, as Rousseau says,
right.
that we require freedom, that we are intrinsically kind of, seeking to have an egalitarian society. Like that's a kind of idea that exists within us. That is a possibility of human nature. Whereas, liberals and conservatives think otherwise. But so in order to actually actualize that, though, you need to have a paradigm where everyone is contributing and everyone is deciding about how to use that contribution. So I don't know, labor camps. I mean, I don't think labor camps all need to be all that bad. Like, I think that you can just, have someone like, I don't know. It's hard to kind of talk about these things because I can tell you though that like, yes, that did happen. Like in the early days of the Soviet Union, like labor deserters were sent to labor camps to work.
Then it gets tricky though, based on like how do you determine who is a labor deserter and that type of thing. Like there were oversights with like Stalin where he would send people, to the gulag or whatever for being, X amount of minutes late to work consecutively X amount of times. That kind of shit. So like that's where it does get super hairy.
And I'm not pretending to know the answers. I'm not. I don't think like I'm not a Stalinist. I don't agree with the way he conducted the whole thing in a lot of ways. But I do think that like requiring people to work, whether you want to do that through like counseling or like whatever else you want to try, like people will be required to work. They'll be required to work a lot less, and they'll be required to work on things that actually matter, but they will need to contribute if they can. And that is part of building a social society. And I don't think that, so for that reason, I don't think that a social society would accept a sex worker or, even like let's think of what other useless things exist, like a lawyer or something like that. I don't know.
A lawyer, a finance banker, a fucking like someone who writes up mortgages, a landlord, a podcaster, all that shit. But then we would get into further like discussions once we have a transitory state where you decide what types of unnecessary production or labor would we want back. Like, would we want to subsidize entertainment as an unnecessary labor and unproductive labor that we want to still have? Or do we want to try to bring entertainment more at a community and local home level? And those are the type of discussions that would have to be broached.
And I think we should have, like, I don't know why people think that's a bad thing. Like, I think it would be great to have more, like, democracy and, like, we are also, like, when you read the ancients, like Plato and Aristotle, like, they talk about humans as political beings. We have an urge to be involved in the decisions of our communities and help decide, how those decisions go, right? Like, and I think that making the time, like, when you reduce the amount of unnecessary labor that's going on and you rationalize production and automate it as much as possible, then you have much more time to be a political being, which I think is an intrinsic part in any society, like, not in any society, but in hunter-gatherer societies. Like, when you look at the way in which they lived, like, it was constantly like, talking about how to move forward with production, where to go in terms of like the camp and what to do, and everyone would participate, including women. There was no contradiction in those kinds of societies. Like, the politics, the social, and the economic production was all integrated. And I think that socialism will be something like that. Like, we'll find that our lives are much richer because we are finally involved again in deciding how to run our own lives. And that is, like, I mean, if Rousseau is correct, and I think, you mentioned that you're more of a Hobbes person, like, but if Rousseau is correct, and this is just kind of returning to kind of what we are as human beings, like becoming a human being, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I have trouble with productivity. Well, for one, I don't want to put anyone in camps. I mean, maybe that makes me an anarchist or whatever, but that's like a hard line for me. I'm not,
because you're going into camps if we got them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, that's exactly why. It's out of self-interest. But either way, like, yeah, the productivity of work thing, I don't know. It just seems so subjective to me. And I know you guys are saying like it's not that subjective. There's a guiding, formula to how you discern what is productive and not. And maybe you're right. Maybe I just don't know. Like, I'll defer to that. But to me, it just seems like a very subjective thing because I don't know. Like, a lot of shit that comes out of this society is superfluous. Is not necessary.
Well, it is. I think think it's not that subjective when you think about it from the point of view of capital. So they only care about things that generate profit for them, right? So whatever generates profit is productive, and it has to be the capitalist sense. So it has to be an MCM, right? So you have to be able to invest money, produce the commodity that will be sold and generate you more money. And that process is the process of capital, right? So if the thing that you're producing you cannot make it more efficient, more productive by putting in through technologies, but it can still make money, that's fine, but it's not it doesn't land under the definition of productivity in terms of productive labor, in terms of capital.
Okay.
That's why sex work that's kind of the thing it's at.
Am I mixing up that so you guys are basing the productivity of work based on capitalist standards, right? That's what it sounds like to me, is that you guys are discerning whether something is valuable based on whether the capitalists say it's valuable.
Well, I think right now, like when we're trying to understand like the world, yeah. But so in a social society, we would have to think about it would know like the productive labor and socially necessary labor would be collapsed into one, right? Because now we're not generating things for profit, we're generating things for human use. So talking about productive work from the proletarian point of view is very different. Yeah.
So product and value would be derived from totally different sets of conditions. It wouldn't be value wouldn't be based on ability to accumulate profit. Value would be based on ability to improve livelihood or well-being, or ability to sustain, ability to reproduce, etc.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to get at is what you got what you were just saying of a value in the proletariat. It's like what would be the guiding? How would you know whether the work would fall into that category? Basically, what I'm trying to get at is away from the capitalist sense of it's for profit or whatever. It's something that adds value. Is there guiding general?
That's where community comes into play for me. I think that's where I think you have to focus on creating strong community bonds and community relations, increasing streams of engagement for small communities in the electoral and political and organizational process of the society, to be able to get the most input on what are the material interest of the population in that local area and how do we best accommodate those.
Well, I think that you can, I really don't like this move from, I think you can make certain objective judgments without the need to necessarily recourse to a democratic kind of I think, between the four of us here, we can all agree that everyone needs healthcare. That's an absolute must, right? I think no one wants to die early or of unnecessary diseases and stuff like that. So that, and there's many things like that are straightforwardly necessary for human society to function. So I would add to that, I would add childcare. I would add elder care, because those two things enable, they're necessary so that people can participate in productive work.
Absolutely.
Right? So
absolutely.
So our generation of the things that they're also it's when you get into the socialist point of view, then it's not really about production per se. It's more about socially necessary labor.
Gotcha.
That allows a society to function. And then you need food, right? You need, so, but then when you move away from those needs, you kind of get into more gray areas that you're just okay, well, do we really need, we need clothing, but do we need new clothing every year, new styles? Or can we create clothing that lasts for 5 years and we just all wear the same thing all the time, like in glorious Soviet Russia? So those are the kind of discussions that would be, I think, more susceptible to the democratic kind of for our cities, for instance. Do we want to have elaborate neoclassical architecture, or do we want to do Bauhaus, simple, so nice, so modern? I love Bauhaus, but do we want that, or do we want neo-Roman style stuff? That will create that will need different kinds of labor, different amounts of time, different materials, and so I think that kind of stuff would have to be socially we'd have to determine it through a democratic process.
Utilitarian more than gauche or gaudy shit. Right.
Yeah, and I think that would be subject to actually probably the kind of antagonisms that we see today in terms of the working class versus the capitalist. Those kind of antagonisms would be replaced with those kinds of discussions. That people would say no, I don't want to do more more work in order to, have like columns like back in Italy or whatever. And people are like, no, it's so nice. We need it. Like it's, that the other kind of architecture is so ugly and we need beautiful cities. So like those kind of discussions are what we would have, like, so politics, wouldn't like disappear, but it would be replaced with different kind of antagonisms. But the main thing is that exploitation would disappear. So we would no longer feel compelled to to work for other than our own betterment and our own society's betterment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I totally agree with what you listed as like societal needs and like necessary for like a healthy society. I think a lot of people agree with that. I think the only difference I probably have is the means in terms of like I don't think labor or the type of work is means to it. I think these things just need to be guaranteed service without any meritocracy, without any labor. That's how I view it, because I'm completely black-pilled on.
Well, how would you provide the services without labor? Like there's automatically a human element. There's automatically a labor element to providing those basic human services to people. So you have to factor that into your theory.
Right. Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is bloat now in terms of like, there's a lot of admin stuff in a lot of these, industries of like healthcare and education that aren't necessary.
Totally. But we're also not meeting the needs of everybody as we could if we were able to truly have a system that was focused on the betterment and the well-being of the working class and people. So that would create more jobs to be able to effectively do that labor. Like in order to, like, there would be less oversight managerial make work jobs, and there'd be more people doing actual effective Medicare stuff, or medical care stuff.
Yeah, I could see that. Maybe I need to get jobs pilled, because I don't know what happened in my lifetime, but I just see it all as a dead average for some reason. But you're right. I mean, certain things you can't really replace with automation. Certain things like that need like a human touch, like childcare or whatever.
It's not like out of possibility that we may one day be able to create, robot. I don't think it's possible for other, like, I don't want to, I think philosophically, I don't think it's possible to replace a human being by a robot, but it may be possible to replace some things that we currently do and replace it with automation. I don't know. It's possible. But,
right.
The point is that, whatever automation we pursue under a social society will be in order to reduce the amount of drudgery and toil that people have to do and free up time for politics and for self-development and, learning and art and all the good things of life, So I think it's kind of automation under capitalism is only pursued if it results in more profit. That's it. Right. So we're going to, under socialism, it'll be pursued for human betterment, to improve everyone's lives. So it's like, I don't like getting into these utopian discussions because it gets a little murky, and I don't actually think these questions can be determined in the abstract. I think that it has to be something that actually we have to be in it and we have to be discussing stuff. I think though it's important to highlight that we are coming with an assumption, with a normative claim perhaps, that this is actually possible within the breadth of human nature, and that human beings can actually operate in a way that's egalitarian and democratic. But I'm not afraid to take that position. Yeah, but that does say that socialism may not be over the horizon. Like, we might have something worse after capitalism, right? Who knows? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and as far as like the automation stuff goes too, like you also have to think about like what is sustainable as far as automation goes. I mean, like, yeah, sure, there are things that human beings do that could be automated, but is automating all of those things actually going to be a healthy, sustainable mode of production for our culture and for our productive economy? Like, and also, will we have enough resources to be able to sustain that mode of production that is going to be heavily energy reliant, et cetera, et cetera? Like, we would have to change the mode in which we get our energy in order to even be able to support that amount of automation and stuff like that as well.
I want to say make it more efficient.
Sure.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I feel like
who knows, right? Like, I think what's clear to me is that there's a lot of of work that needs to be done just to meet human needs. Like basic human needs are not being met in our society. And like, you know, what is sustainable ecologically speaking, all that stuff. I really don't trust like bourgeois scientists to like make a fair determination in this sense, because, you know, as far as the proletariat is concerned, capitalism has never been sustainable.
Totally.
It's always just a constant like cycle of crisis where people are thrown in and out of work, you know, and there's suddenly no way to connect human need with labor and you know, the means of production, like, you know, like the instruments of production, whatever. So, you know, I think, you know, the whole Marxist frame is to focus first on production and kind of build it from there. And the ecological aspect and all that stuff, I think is not really hard to solve. Like, I don't really, because like, you know, for instance, when I was reading about the birth rate stuff, like there's a lot of neo-Malthusianism. It's hard.
Malthusian, yeah.
That's coming out. That's like, oh, we can't support a big population, therefore it's good that birth rates are declining. But I mean, like, who knows what a, you know, too many people is, or what is, like, I don't know, like, who knows?
We can support way more. That's just bourgeois shit. That's like the manufactured scarcity.
Yeah, but I think the point is, like, I don't know, and like, I don't think Engels actually talked about this, and he's like, only a communist society they'll be able to figure out how to deal with that if there is like an upper limit. Like, but capitalists won't. Like, they can't. They are unable to. They need to increase value every single year. Like, they need to grow. Profit needs to grow by GDP has to grow by a compound like 3.1% or something to remain stable. So it can't deal with the ecological crisis anyways. So I don't know why it's like vying on population. It has nothing to do with the like. I mean, it has something to do with it, but it doesn't get to the core of why capitalism is unsustainable.
It's just individualizing the problem again, like shifting the burden of the fucking crumbling like political economic system we live under onto the individual actors of people having fucking kids.
Yeah, like climate change and fucking COVID and all that. The fucking if you have you've seen those pictures where it's like if you have a kid and you're white, then you're committing eco-terrorism.
Yeah, that's the left. It's so stupid. Like, it's so anti-human. It's so like detached from like the reality of what people are going through, which is like, you know, people aren't having that many kids anymore. Like, people are having maybe one kid, maybe two, like if they can get there. They're already having fewer kids than what they desire, not because they care about the environment, but because of the capitalist mode of production, because it's putting people into this antagonistic position where you can either reproduce yourself or you can reproduce capital, but you cannot do both at once without one suffering. So, or you can either make a wage, or you can, you know, reproduce yourself, not only in the sense of having children, but also in yourself as a human being, like, you know, learning and doing exercise and doing all the stuff that helps us be a better person the next day. And so this applies to men as much as women, but with women, because we biologically give birth to children, that aspect takes a kind of a more heightened reality that, you know, like, I can either have a kid, but then I can't work as much, and then I might, like, you know, fall into poverty. Oh shit, do I want to have a kid? Do I want to have a second kid? Right. You know, like, that's the kind of thing that is going on right now. So it has nothing. The left is like, I can't believe this kind of argument has gotten so much like buy-in from like.
Which argument?
The argument that like you know, if you have children, then you're gonna ruin the planet or whatever.
Yeah. That shit gets me so tight. It gets me so angry. No, dead ass, because like in my mind, it was a right wing argument. It was like, oh yeah, well, you know, you're
right. Yes,
we got to worry about overpopulation. There's too many people coming here, and too many, you know, we can't sustain it all. And then now I hear leftists saying like, oh yeah, you know, this is the point. You know, we can't have too many kids because, like, you know, you're gonna use too many plastic straws and, like, you know, all this shit. And it makes me so fucking angry. It genuinely does, because I hated the right wing argument, and I don't care like what people view about like immigration and like, oh, you know, there's a materials reason why immigration is bad or whatever. I don't believe in scarce, so I don't believe immigration is bad. I don't believe that at all, and I don't think it's a zero sum game with with the immigrant population and the local labor population. I don't believe that. I don't believe that at all. So,
I mean, I think same thing for declining birth rates. Like, they're gonna hear from capitalists more and more nowadays that like, oh, like the birth rate is declining. And listen, I'm against declining birth rates, not because I think that there's some kind of intrinsic effect to the economy. I only care about it for one reason and one reason only, and it's because people are having fewer kids than they say they want. And so I'm interested in expanding human freedom, in enabling people to live the lives they want to live. And so that's why I think that's why the socialists should care about it right now. But like, I don't buy the idea that like, just because, you know, we have fewer working class people, we necessarily need to accept a lower level of life. Like Michael Lind has a short kind of paragraph in his book about this, the New Class War, where he talks about how we could just increase productivity per worker in order to make sure that everyone has what they need, even though there's fewer work. Yeah, but that's the thing. It's just about distribution, right? Like, it's not about necessarily like, you know, who knows what an ideal population is. Like, I don't even know. Like, you know, I Colin Tai, when she was working on this, like she was like, no, like, you know, it might surprise you to hear, but like when she talked about abortion, she was actually against abortion because she was like, why would we allow abortion in a situation where we need more workers? Like, we've had this huge civil war, like these famines prior to the revolution, there was like so many famines that happened. She was like, we need more workers. We need more people to be born and participate in production. But she, in the end, she came on the side, she was pro-abortion and pro-legalizing abortion because of the fact that when you make abortion illegal, women will just do it anyways, but under unsafe conditions and kill themselves and kill their children. So she was, and harm themselves otherwise, right? So she was like, listen, like, we need more children born, but because of the fact this might hurt women laborers, who we definitely need, we need to make this legal and make it easier for people to have children through like good childcare, good housing guarantees, food guarantees. Like, she was working in the revolution, right? So she could go all out. She was like, yo, we should have like crews of people that go around cleaning your house, so that when you come back from work, your house is clean. Like, she was, you know, she went all out. But like, like that was the kind of approach that she took to, you know, kind of increasing birth rates. And so capitalists will instead try to use, like, I imagine they're probably going to mostly use coercion when they see that their social democratic reforms are not very effective. Or they're going to try to do immigration for as long as they can. But like, yeah, like I don't accept any of the, I don't think we should accept just because birth rates are declining that our level of life should go down. Like, it has very little to do with that. Like, productivity is already way higher than it needs to be in order for us to live like everyone to live a decent life.
Look, there's plenty of space. I don't know where I heard this, but like a long time ago, I heard that like overpopulation is for space. The spatial concerns are ridiculous. Like, there's enough. I mean, it's almost intuitive when you go to rural areas of any part of the globe. Like, there is enough space for everybody. And as far as resources or whatever, like, you know what I mean? Like, the richest people, like when you look at the income inequality, it's like they could cover, especially once you get a handle on price gouging, they could handle the bare necessities. There's enough overproduction and like surplus value right now in the world combined that you could cover the bare necessities of everybody on the planet a couple times over. I mean, it's like once you get a handle on them, price gouging everything. But yeah, it's like, I don't believe the overpopulation thing from the left or the right. I don't believe it. I think it's complete liberal capitalist bullshit. It really is, and it makes me so fucking angry whenever I see it. But I mean, it's everywhere now. And it's like, it's exactly what they want. They want people to have this crabs in a barrel mentality of like, oh, there's not enough to go around, so we need to trim our numbers, and I need to
absolutely.
Fight you. I hate that shit. But yeah.
I'm sewing my Marxist agenda on the Fed Post podcast.
We're fuming. We're like, oh, this fucks.
See, I snuck in with a trad agenda, and then I'm like, actually not trad. Oh,
it's true. This is classic female trickery. I don't.
Tricknology.
Switch.
Yeah, tricking people on Twitter is a female trait.
Yes, masters of deception. Yeah,
mistresses of deception. Thank you very much.
Yeah, women are naturally cunning and deceptive.
Yeah, I was at a museum today, and there was like all these paintings of Eve, and I was with my friend, and I was like, there was all these pictures of her like tricking Adam. Yeah, and I'm just like, women, huh? Fuck. Not in paradise anymore, because of this broad couldn't keep her hands off that apple.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. Anyways, guys, thank you so much. I think I'm gonna have to go because I have work tomorrow. But yeah, I loved being on this podcast. It's so great to kind of meet you more, not just through 140 characters on Twitter.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for having me on.
No, really appreciate you coming on. Thank you for coming on, Leila.
Yeah, great. Okay.
It was really
Sorry.
great. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So I guess we'll see each other on Twitter. But yeah, looking forward to other shows. I'm gonna listen through the catalog, maybe Patreon for you guys.
Hey,
Cool.
thanks.
Yeah.
Let's do this again sometime.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. Have a good night.
Bye.
Take care.
Thanks, guys.